Welcome back to Sociology 227. This is Mol and Law Video 2. In this video I've got three goals. First, I'm going to tell you about Annemarie Mol. Next, I'm going to tell you about her book, The Body Multiple, the readings this week, and an example from my own research to talk about the body as an actor network. This will get you ready to do your two-paragraph response. Let's do it. Here is Annemarie Mol, a philosopher who takes Latour's thought very seriously. She doesn't just extend it. Trained as a physician, Mol turns to medical practices. Her interest is not in facts about diseases, but exploring how we enact disease in the process of doing medicine. In the piece you read today, you'll see that part of this is about discourses of medicine and the diseased body. She and Law address the entanglements that come up with disease as it is lived and treated. Not just a focus on talking or writing about disease, in the case of discourse, but on the practical doing of medicine and disease. In this video, we'll look at two of her books, The Body Multiple and The Logic of Care. One now, one later. Though the books explore a similar subject matter, the practical doings of medicine, they take slightly different objects. The first is of the practical entanglement with the vascular disease, atherosclerosis, based on her ethnography of a Dutch hospital. The second addresses the way that we think about medicine, disease, and the goals of medical care. Who should guide care? What are its goals? And what kinds of subjects are involved in that calculation? Let's look to the body multiple in detail. The body multiple uses a similar approach to that used by Latour and Woolgar in laboratory life. She follows some doctors and patients around in the hospital. What she is interested in, though, is not the truth of vascular disease, but the various ways in which those myriad truths are put to work. Like Latour, she follows around inscriptions. Her book is filled with patient charts and photos of surgeries in process, where we engage with vascular disease as a practical object. The basic argument of the book is that in the various places of the Dutch hospital, vascular disease manifests in very different ways, and thus is a different object. Yes, we only have one body, but when treated and acted on from various vantage points, the body forms a multiplicity, like any other actor network. So, in the inpatient clinic, the way that we treat vascular disease is very different than the way we do in the outpatient clinic. And determining the rate of heart attacks and strokes at the population level is very different than in the way in which we find out if a dead body really had atherosclerosis all the time. Each of these ways of acting on and acting with the disease, what she will call an enactment, requires a different set of practical methods and ways of knowing the disease and directions for care. One body multiplied through one disease. Multiplied. Here I'm going to use a big word, ontology, referring to that which is. Mol's book is about the politics of that which is in relation to vascular disease. The key takeaway from all this is that we need to rethink the philosophical categories that we use to talk about things. Maybe, says Mol, we can talk about things outside of how we practice with them, but this isn't a terribly useful way of addressing how the world takes shape and how we live with disease. One doesn't have isolated heart disease. It is lived and unfolds in matters of practice. Practice takes precedence. This means, says Mol, we should move from an understanding of disease as something that just is, as traditional ontology would have it, and instead focus on it in terms of the complexities of everyday life. Ontology, then, is a matter of politics. It is a political question about how we deal with the disease, not the conditions in which we know it. This is the very same movement that Latour will take from the philosophy of science to the observation of scientific practice. So Mol's argument is, if you go to different floors of the hospital, you see the same disease treated very differently. It is a different thing in terms of how it is achieved. Next, let's turn to the readings this week. We'll see the same stuff at work. In the readings, you find Mol and Law talking about how blood sugar is managed. As in the body multiple, blood sugar levels are lived, managed, and measured. To live with diabetes is constantly to watch one's blood sugar to ensure it doesn't get too low. One must organize their life around self-care in terms of diet and measurement. This isn't done by the body alone, but rather involves a bunch of material aids that allows one to get on with their life. So, in this case, the living body is a network outcome. As in Mol's book, The Body Multiple, Mol and Law are telling us that it matters less to say what a body is than to document the processes that we undergo to maintain it. In this case, a body with diabetes. We can follow the body around as an achievement ethnographically. It is one thing to define a disease, but another to watch it unfold. Managing blood sugar is just like the scientific practices we saw in Latour and Woolgar's laboratory life. In video 1, I talked about trials of strength to show you how we enroll allies in scientific controversies. The example I used was screenshots, an inscription. In the piece this week, you can also read that the body resists particular management techniques. One blood sugar can never be fully managed with 100% certainty. In this way, we act on the body, but it also acts in its own ways. This is what I mean when I say the body is a site of resistance. I thought I'd give you an example from my own research on muscular dystrophy, another place where the body is a practical achievement. My example involves this thing, referred to as the bag, and breathing exercises. Rather than give you the whole song and dance about the project, I'll just say that as muscular dystrophy progresses, breathing issues become more and more important. You can't take as deep a breath with reduced chest muscle strength, and treating Duchenne muscular dystrophy involves respiratory treatment. We watch people go to the clinic for it. To manage the disease, people are assigned homework. In this example, breath stacking, which is the process of taking in multiple breaths at once without breathing out. This helps maintain chest strength and prevents things like fluid buildup in the lungs. Here I'm going to talk about the example of Mike, his dad, his therapist, and the ambu bag you see here. The device is made out of a pump, some tubing, a valve that lets air go in one way and not the other, and a mask. Different people can use a mouthpiece and a nose plug, depending on capabilities. So, Mike, not his real name, and his dad are at the clinic going through the breathing exercises. Here I'll talk about 4 stages and read from the project field notes. While I'm telling you about the visit, I want you to think about how agency is distributed within a network made of human and non-human components. 1. First assembly. Nina, a pseudonym, is the therapist, telling Mike and his dad what to do with the bag. From the notes. Nina guided them through the process of assembling the device, indicating the order in which they were to be added. 2. Bad first try. The guys try once, and they mess it up. Back to the field notes. Mike sat back in his chair and pulled himself closer to Dad, where their knees were almost touching. Dad held the bag in his hand and explained what he was going to do. Nina said this was correct. Mike pulled the tube part to his mouth and put his lips around it. Dad held the bag and he counted down to start the test. After 2 pumps, Mike took the tube out of his mouth and began coughing. Dad asked if he was okay. Dad turned to Nina and he said Mike was nervous because he was told that too much pressure could pop his lungs. Nina said it could only happen if the person pumping the bag was very careless and pumped way too hard. Mike nodded. 3. Nina isn't satisfied. As I said, Nina isn't happy. I find you're both not coordinated, she said. 4. They do it again successfully. 1 last time. The notes. It looked way more coordinated than the first time again, with Dad saying in when Mike was supposed to breathe in, and Dad pumped the bag. Nina then asked, "Did you feel that differently? Did you feel the air?" Mike nodded and said that he did. The point. Breathing tests take practice, and they are an example of how bodily agency is a practical outcome. We don't all have a disease that will lead to the same kinds of breathing issues, but we all act on our bodies in one way or another. We do so with both human and non-human components. Here I've listed all of the heterogeneous components that make up breath stacking as it unfolds in the clinical space. It is important for you to understand that none of this action would be possible if all the components weren't coordinated. What matters for us and for Mol, is not what the entities are, but how the entities act in concert to promote breathing. In The Logic of Care, Mol argues that this way of thinking about disease as a practical outcome tells us something about the optimal goals of medical care. The Logic of Care discusses two very different views of what medical practice is and what it should be like. In the first of these, The Logic of Choice, Mol is thinking about a rational choice understanding of what medicine is. In this view, patient independence is paramount. The role of the medical practitioner is to inform the patient, so far as they are able, about the benefits and risks of a particular treatment. Then, the individual autonomous patient makes a choice, so far as they are able, to follow or ignore that advice. The data of medicine is to be presented in as unbiased a fashion as possible, using the most objective numerical measures available. Mol argues that this logic is based on an understanding of disease foreign to what she found in her practical ethnographies of atherosclerosis and of diabetes. Neither of these diseases unfold in a manner outside of the practical entanglements of everyday life. The rational decision-making model that she locates in The Logic of Choice doesn't address the complexities of disease, the way in which we dwell in our diabetes. The Logic of Choice has a finite start and end. We are faced with a choice. We gather information and make the best choice we can. Story over. She'll contrast this way of thinking with what she calls the logic of care. Mol argues that the independence model isn't a fair representation of how we live with disease. Disease isn't about a series of choices, but a practical way of organizing one's life. We learn from mistakes and cultivate new practical methods. We become entangled with new people and things, ways of measuring our capabilities, and assessing our own abilities. Medical advice is part of this, but only part. Choice logic sounds like you can just receive healthcare over the phone. Anyone who's tried knows this isn't as effective as it sounds. She wants an ethics of practical entanglement for both atherosclerosis, for diabetes, for our coherent and yet always multiple bodies. That's it for me. Now it's time for your 2-paragraph response. In 2 paragraphs, between 5 to 8 sentences in length, and with reference to the readings. 1. Explains what it means to say that a body is an actor network. 2. Come up with your own example of bodily self-care to make this case. See you next week.